Hi, I'm Melinda Kucsera, your indie fantasy author, and I'm back with another episode of Fantasy Lore and More. And today we have Christiane Knight, who's here to talk about her book, In Sleep You Know. I've got questions, so hopefully she's brought some answers. So welcome, Christiane, and tell us about In Sleep You Know.
Okay, well, In Sleep You Know is, I call it a contemporary fantasy. It was my attempt to write a book that is more along the lines of what I call traditional urban fantasy, as opposed to kind of the darker spin that it's become over time. Um, it is about a guy named Merrick who is a really nice guy. He's in a band, he's a musician, and he has absolutely no other plans with his life except for being a musician. He kind of drifts along. One day, sort of daring himself to do it, he decides he's going to go crash a party at this house that's got a reputation for throwing these big, awesome, mysterious parties.
Oh boy.
Little does he know that the house is full of fae, and not your not necessarily the nastiest of fae or the nicest of fae, but definitely fae. And they're not happy that he's crashed the party. He runs into some characters. He ends up getting into a battle with some of my favorite ones, the ladies, which I can talk about in great detail. And they determine that since he can handle himself with them, perhaps he's the answer to their problems. And they end up swearing him to a 7 cycle fealty cycle with them, and now he's kind of stuck being with the Fae. And that unfortunately is not going to sit well with his band that he needs to explain this to at some point. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So the adventures go on. He decides that maybe this isn't the route he wants for him. He runs away, and then he finds out what happens when you swear an oath with the Fae and then you run away and don't keep up with it.
So he
Dun,
screwed
dun, dun.
around and he found out.
Yes, indeed.
He found out what happened. Poor guy. All right, so let's meet him. Let's get into an excerpt and let's hear him in his own words.
All right. Well, this chapter is actually he's kind of accepted his fate at this
Oh,
point. Um, this is where we start to see some of the opposition that he's coming up with being part of the Illyrianan, which is what my Fae call themselves. Um, Up until this point, he's only had to face himself and the challenges that were thrown at him that he decided he was going to decline and then eventually accepted. Now he's going to find out what some of the Fae that aren't so nice are like.
oh boy.
Oh, just to give you a couple of tips as to who people are. Um, Ashlyn is his girlfriend in the Fae. She can walk in dreams. She's kind of instrumental in getting him to come back and decide that maybe this is a route he wants to pursue. And some of the other people are Lucy. She's the guitar player for his band, and Cullen is another Fae that is there. But I'll kind of introduce you as we go along.
So wait, so the girlfriend,
Hmm.
was she the girlfriend before he crashed the party or after?
After, well, she's the first person that he meets, and he's really lucky that she's the first person that he meets because she kind of helps him out a lot. She is also kind of an outcast in her house because of her strange upbringing. She's different from all the rest of them because her mother was Fae and her father was mortal, but they met in the dream time, and that is where she
Oh.
was born. So she's looked down upon the rest of them because she's very different from the rest of them. They look at her as that she doesn't belong. So immediately they kind of have a connection.
So they met and then they started seeing each other and then he tried to run away.
Sort of. Sort of.
I'm just trying to get a
Um,
feel for like where we're starting and like what kind of happened before.
I can back up some. Let's
That's
see.
up to you. I mean, because I know you
Yeah.
said you didn't want to read the first chapter because it's available online for people to read. So I'm just trying to like make sure that I know where we're starting. I don't
Well,
like being confused. It
well,
bothers
let's
me.
see. Let's see. Let me start from Let me start from do.
Because I don't want to like mess you up. I know you didn't want to read the very beginning.
Now, I can start from a little after the very beginning. This is, let's start from, oh, my mouth is very dry. Let's start from after he's accepted. He's at the party and he's accepted that he's going to have to become, he's going to have to join this group. They kind of make it a deal he can't refuse, and they're fey, so it looks nice, right? So
Right,
he
right.
does his thing. He does his thing, and there's a big ceremony, and things get really wild, and he passes out.
So
So
this
he's
is after all that.
yeah, he's still at the house, and he's pledged himself, and they've done some things to him to make him acceptable to to get through this 7-year cycle. But now he's waking up, and he's like, "Oh shit." Um,
What did I sign up for?
oh right.
All right, go ahead.
He saw Ashlyn first. He knew she'd planned it that way. Out of all of those in the room, she looked most normal for what it was worth. Okay, so I'm actually a little bit. This is before. This is actually when they're doing the pledge. I jumped in a little early. Okay. Her features were wilder and more fey. She had more curve to her, a softer, pale voluptuousness that made her even more inviting looking. But overall, she looked as though he had seen her all night. She smiled at him and said, "I am myself. I think you saw me from the first with your heart, and so no glamour was ever evident. But what of the rest? What do you think?" He looked past her to Cullen, who also looked much the same, except for with much pointier ears and eyes that reminded Merrick of a fox. His canines were very pointy when he smiled, and he looked every bit the rascal. Fallon, on the other hand, was dramatically different in appearance. She was older but less regal. She seemed to have gained a majesty that was only accented by the extreme slant of her eyes and fullness of her features. She brought to mind at first glance a woodcut he'd seen long ago, an image of the Lady of the Moon, only painted in gold and reddish tones. Her ears were pointed and curled at the tips, and she seemed to have tiny horns that rose up from her eyebrows and arched back into her hair. They looked like they belonged on her somehow. When she smiled at him, it was as if the whole room lit up. She radiated power and benevolence to him, and deep in his heart he was glad that she was in charge of these strange creatures. He turned then to Sheridan and found him to be much wilder looking than he had even expected. He was ragged and wild-haired, even more so than he'd appeared before, and most notably, every inch that Merrick could see of him was covered with thin and spidery blue swirled tattoos. He had rings that went down the outside edges of both his ears, and he wore brown leather bracers on his forearms that had rings along the edges of those as well. Merrick could well imagine him living at the base of a tree somewhere in a green forest. Sheridan grinned wildly and handed him a small circlet made of branches and ivy, about the size of a bracelet. "Put this on, friend. Oak and ivy will do you well." Merrick slid it on his left arm to the approving of his friend, and he gasped as it melted from the air and burned into his skin. It left behind a gorgeous tattoo, completely lifelike, of the leaves and branches entwined around his wrist. Merrick studied it incredulously. Fallon urged him then. "We await your decision, Merrick. Can you stay with us for the appointed time and be one with us?" He looked around the room at all the different folk there. A small pixie-like boy with feathers for hair. The green and black harpies that were the ladies. A group of tall tree people who bent and swayed with grace. A round, spiky woman that was surely related to a hedgehog, he would wager. Their magic and their exotic looks were overwhelming, enticing. How could he say no? "I will join, lady. How can I walk away from all of you?" Fallon nodded as if she expected him to acquiesce. "Cullen, bring the vial." Ashlyn told him, "Lie back, love. You'll want to be comfortable for this. Trust me." He gave her a funny look, but did as he was told. At this juncture, and as muddled as he felt, it seemed prudent to follow her directions, especially as he'd more or less put himself into her hands. Cullen had returned with a gleaming decanter that was finely made of a hand-blown scarlet glass. It glittered in his elegant hands, and he seemed to treat it reverently. He took the small glass that served as a lid from the top and filled it with a sparkling, clear liquid, then handed it to Merrick carefully. "Drink it quickly, like a shot of fine liquor. It will burn going down, and act quickly," Cullen advised. Merrick took a deep breath and said, "Cheers," then downed the glass in one fell swoop. Fire blossomed inside, and the world spun around him. He felt the glass taken from his hand and someone's cool hands, Ashland's, on his brow for a moment. From very far away, through a burst of starlight and fog, he heard Fallon's crystalline voice say, "It is done. Merrick, you are ours for one cycle, and we are yours." There was a cheer, and he realized they were all crowded above him in a circle. Each one dropped something on him: a flower, a berry, a glass bead, a tiny key. He lost track. He noted in a tiny corner of his mind that Adana dropped a thorn and gave him a maliciously pointed toothed smile. She looked as if she wanted to devour him. After leaving their offerings, the folk filed out, leaving Fallon for last. She kneeled next to Merrick on the couch and gently mopped his brow before speaking. "You are a brave little blackbird, and your courage does you well. Do not fear what happens now. We have given you gifts that will evidence themselves ere long, and I think they will make your heart glad that you chose this path." She laid a rainbow-sheened black feather upon Merrick's chest and told him, "When you are ready, you will fly." She kissed him on the forehead and then left, with only a lingering scent of amber to note her passing. Merrick suddenly felt very ill and convulsed violently. He knew he would have to retch and tried desperately to get to the door, get outside, not soil this place. But Sheridan was there holding him down while Ashland provided a container for his sickness. After a bit, it passed, and Cullen brought a goblet of water and gave him sips until he felt settled. All during this, the walls moved around them and the ceiling breathed. He could see shadows moving in the corners of his vision, but when he whipped his head around to catch them skulking, there was nothing to be seen. He sighed with frustration and confusion. What had they done to him? Hours or days passed, he knew not which. Sheridan left and returned with the remains of a fresh rabbit and blood on his hands. He held it out to Merrick, an offering, and Merrick grimaced and cowered in fear. The wild man laughed and left, but not before smearing a touch of the blood on the soles of Merrick's bare feet. Where had his boots gone? He slept and woke in a fevered dream state, and a strangeness raged around him. Once he awoke to find the room filled with small blue birds, and at his shout they took to flight excitedly and started crashing about the chamber. One landed at the foot of his bed and morphed into the small boy that had been there at his initiation. "Fortune favors the brave, Blackbird," he whispered, and then took off half-winged. Merrick cried out and fell into blackness, falling into a deep pit, a consuming darkness that he thought perhaps he might never escape from. But then Ashlyn was there, and she held him in her grasp, pulling him towards sunlight. He opened his eyes and found that the room was bathed in daylight, the heavy curtains thrown back to allow the light in, blinding in his brilliance. Ashlyn was asleep on the floor next to the small lounge, her thin hand stretched up from where she was to grasp his wrist. She looked exhausted, and he carefully disengaged her from his arm before trying to rise. He felt as if he'd been on that couch for days, and his equilibrium seemed to agree, as he could only achieve a stumbling, awkward angle once he made it up from his bed. He smelled awful, too. What a party! He wondered what it was that they'd given him to drink. He was ravenous, but he was so dizzy that he doubted anything he ate would stay down anyway. He shook his head to clear away the cobwebs, only to start another bout of vertigo. And rising up out of that miasma of brain swirl, he realized something very odd. The walls of the room, which he would have sworn to be white when he first saw them, were covered with an odd pattern. No, not a pattern. Words. His words. Somewhere along the time he could not recall, he had covered the walls as high as he could reach with writing. He stared incredulously at his handiwork, wondering how he could have done so much in a night. Or two? "Ashlyn, wake up. I need to know how long I've been here." She groaned softly from her place on the floor and said, "Merrick, what's wrong?" He knelt down next to her and asked, "What happened here? I can't remember anything. How long has it been?" Ashlyn muttered, "I am so not ready to deal with this." She gave him a hopeful look and said, "I don't suppose we can have some breakfast first, could we?" "No, no hope of that. I see. Ugh." She buried her face in her hands for a moment, then popped back up wearing a serious look. "Okay, sit down, then. This might be a little weird." She took a deep breath and said, "We have always been here, but what we are is up for debate. People, your people, have given us many different names to bear. We were considered gods by much of the ancient world, the Romans and the Hellenes and Celts. Then we became fairy, fae, pixie. We slowly sank in stature to your minds, and by the time of the Industrial Revolution, many of our kind were gone, died off from being unable to adapt. The ones that remained learned that there were things we could still do here, ways to belong. There are pockets of us left, spread all over the world, hidden in your midst and living along with you. Our presence brings you activity, creativity, beauty, artistry, but we need you as well. Without your thoughts, your energy, your ability, we cannot live. It is a symbiotic relationship of the highest degree, but the rub is that you don't need us in the way that we need you. Without you, we will wither away and die. Without us, you will continue on. We merely spur your people to greater heights. We give you dreams and visions, inspire you to ideas and expressions you might not have found otherwise. I will not lie to you. We need you. We can give you much, but we take as well. What you give to us is valuable without measure. Do you understand? And I'm going to leave it there.
Wow, that's quite the cliff. We have to read the book to find out if he understands.
I'll give you a hint. He does not. He freaks out.
Does he understand by the end of the book?
Yes, he very much understands by the end of the book. Eventually, he comes around with a lot of help from Ashlyn and from his friend Lucy, who basically pushes him into facing up to the fact that he's not going to do anything else with his life, so he better get on this Fae train and ride it.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's certainly one way to do it. That's interesting. That's all right. So, why is the title "In Sleep You Know"? Like, ever since I saw the title, I was like, I need to know why that is that. It's an interesting title.
Well, it has to do with Ashlyn. She comes to him in dreams and tries to explain things to him as he's freaking out, and as his time away from the Fae is working on his body and his mind. He's very sick after a while because it's like an addiction. You know, you become connected with them, and the further you are away from them, the harder it is to be away and the harder it is to do anything. So she comes to him in his dreams and she tries to convince him that he needs to come back. And she explains to him that in dream time you can't lie. You know, anything that they say between each other in dream time is the truth. It may be a truth that is hard to understand, but it is true in some way. And that is where that title comes from, because from her explaining it, he begins to understand that this is actually not a huge mind screw. It is, it is something that is actually happening, and that it is for his best interest to get involved with them.
Oh, wow. So she can't come visit him out in the human world. He's got to go to wherever Fairy is.
Yeah, because he runs away and they don't know where he lives. They try to find him, and what actually happens is that makes the whole connection finally come together, where they can come and meet him outside of the house that they live in. Is Lucy gets it into her head that if she doesn't do something, Merrick is going to be in a really bad space because he's being a hardhead about all of it. So she goes and gets a scooter from their mutual friend and bandmate, Sousa, and she rides it to the house and barges in and basically is like, "You're going to fix my friend. Help me." And that goes over interestingly well. At first she's afraid maybe she's being too much of a hard ass about it, but what happens is that she kind of wins them over with her straightforwardness. I love Lucy. She's a really fun character. She actually is the main character in the next book in the series, because she has a lot to explore.
So
She's very
Lucy
fun.
is human. She's not Fae.
Yes, she's not Fae. The that is Lucy is Merrick's best friend from high school and beyond. They were friends for a really long time, and she's the guitar player for his band. They also have a drummer, Souza, who is also a bit of an enigma. He lives in a giant house that is basically abandoned, but he lives in the basement. So there's this huge house that he has that he only uses this tiny corner of for them to go practice in and for him to live in,
Hmm.
which reasons become obvious later on. But they're all really fun characters. So much fun to write.
What makes them fun?
Well, they're very sassy characters. They have very strong personalities. They're very much like people that I know. There's a lot of music scene in this book because that's my background. Before I did any of this, or kind of in the middle of all this, I was a DJ and a musician, and I ran a goth club. So and I've been involved in the punk scene and all that. So a lot of these people are very much the kind of people that I have known my whole life. Very salt of the earth, goofy, funny, loud, obnoxious, and with very strong ethics. And it makes them really fun to write. They feel that the number one comment I get about my books is my characters feel real, and to me they are real. So, you know, they
That's
they talk
awesome.
they talk to me all the time. So,
Well, I mean, I'm sure they've got a lot to say.
uh,
Do you listen is the question. They're so sassy and so real.
sometimes I don't have a choice. I mean, there are certain aspects of this story that I definitely did not expect to go the directions that they did. They just kind of took charge and were like, "Here we go." I'm
And
like,
you're
"All
like
right, I'm along for the ride, writing
you're
it."
like,
Okay,
"Screw the outline. Let's go. I'm
yeah.
on board."
It was a lot
That's
of fun that way, though.
Yeah, so you said before when we first started that this is like urban fantasy used to be. I used to be a
Mhm.
really big fan of urban fantasy. That piqued my interest. What do you mean by the way urban fantasy used to be? Are we talking about like before romance took over? And I, no shade on romance. I know a
No,
lot of people love it. It's not for me. I mean, a romantic subplot's cool, but I like action. I like military fantasy books, and I like action and adventure and mysteries and people doing other things.
yeah, yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
a relationship on the side or in the background. I mean, people have that, but I don't like the plot to revolve around that.
yeah. I mean, there's two major relationships in this book, but neither one of them are. They're important, but they're not romantic. They're normal people having relationships and working through things, as going alongside of all the
Yeah,
other things that are happening in the story.
I
Yeah,
like that better because you're not guaranteed a happily ever after with that because it's mirroring more real life scenarios and
yeah,
they
yeah,
might break up. They may
yeah,
not even
and
make up. They may
they
see other
they
people.
they may die. Who knows?
I mean, yeah, like I just feel like there's more tension with that because there's no guarantees and I like that better. I don't know. I'm weird.
No, I'm the same way. I mean, romance is great as part of a natural story, but I don't need a focus of it. That's just me.
Yeah,
And
same.
like you said, no shade to anybody who does. It's just not my jam. So,
Same.
yeah.
And I am glad that there is like because romance is one of the places that like empowers women, but now we've got other stories that they can be empowered in action stories too, which
Yes,
I
yes,
like.
definitely. That's the big thing. Everybody in my story, if they don't have power when they start out, they come into their power in some way or another. But from any walk of life, the both some of the fae and some of the mortals, male, female, every everybody gets a little bit of taste of growth in this, and it doesn't have anything to do with being in a romance. It has to do with them figuring themselves out. Yeah, I
Which
think it
is
was really,
important.
yeah. Well, part of what was fun for me is that the Fae in my story are also infallible and are learning in the process because they have a lot of preconceived notions about how their world works, and bringing these mortals into it really shakes up their foundation in ways that changes everything for them. I mean, it changes everything. They go from being reclusive to coming back out into the world, they learn that a lot of their prejudices are wrong, and that they learn to understand why they got the prejudices that they do, but also that they've screwed themselves up out of so many things by having them. And it's not an easy process either. I mean, unlearning a prejudice is a really tough thing. Um, there's also a lot of small nods to things that go on in Baltimore, which is where it's set, which is where I'm from.
Ah,
Um,
okay. I was gonna
yeah,
ask what Charm City is. I mean, I've
yeah.
heard the phrase, but I was like, I just can't remember which city that is.
It's the very ironic name for Baltimore. um, we have some charm, sure. We're a very quirky and weird city. Um, I mean, like, actually, I go into that in the book I'm writing right now. I talk about that a little bit. Like, we're known for John Waters and UB Blake and Edgar Allan Poe and lots of interesting things happening during Prohibition, but also, we've got tough problems going on here too, which I touch on a little bit. And this book is a little less involved with what's going on outside in the world of Baltimore. The second one touches a little bit more on some of the problems happening in the city itself, but it does kind of draw attention to the fact that preconceived notions about a lot of different people and a desire to wrest the energy of how the city works is a lot of what is going wrong with the city. And that's kind of a driving plot point of why they want to solve the problems that they're facing. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So I saw something, I don't know if it's your blurb or somewhere, that about graffiti spells.
Yes.
What's that about?
Well, we get introduced to a character whose name is Valley, and Valley is awesome. I love Valley. Um, Valley works at a coffee shop called the Frisky Bean, and she is unhoused, and she is a graffiti artist. It also turns out that she is half fae and she can cast spells with her graffiti, but she doesn't realize that yet. She also
Oh.
has an ability to, if she stands very still and concentrates on it very hard, of making herself very difficult to be seen. And both of these abilities come into play in the story. She's a really fun character. She's totally punk rock and awesome.
That's wild. I just I'm like from the New York City area, the New York City
Nice.
metro area. There's lots of graffiti around. When I
Yes,
saw
yes.
that, I was like, I'm very interested.
Yes, but she uses graffiti in a couple of different ways to control different things. And she doesn't realize, like I said, that she has this ability. She discovers it after she becomes involved with Merrick and the other Fae. And it's really fun to watch how she develops the skill because I go into it in some detail. I have some friends who are graffiti artists, and I have a really deep seated interest in street art. So I was able to kind of incorporate some terms and things into that in a way that feels realistic, I think.
That's really cool. I just saw that and it just like I was just sort of flashing back to like there's some scenes about graffiti mixed with like magic and I think it's like We Became the City by NK. I'm gonna slaughter her name.
Jemison, yeah.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No, she's
I love
awesome.
that book. I haven't read the sequel, the world one, but I loved We Became the City. Like I thought it was like I said, I grew up in the New York City metro area. I went to college in the Bronx for a year. I went to grad school in Manhattan. I've worked in the city. I've taken the Metro North trains. I've been all over the place. I just felt like it like I was so excited about that book and I was so happy like just the joy in reading it. I
Let
loved it. It was so everybody I knew. It was perfect.
let me tell you a funny
And
thing. That book came out right around the same time as In Sleep You Know did, and
oh
when I saw the blurb for it, I was like, "Oh, crap," because I was like because it has a they're very resonant, like
yeah.
the feel of them, they resonate very well with, "Hey, that's a modern comp I can use to some degree."
Or I
Um,
was thinking Half Resurrection Blues by
mm,
Daniel Jose Older, which he has the trilogy. It's set in Brooklyn. It is fantastic. It is just it is I love that too. It's a very multicultural cast. There is like it's very New York City.
Ooh,
I
I don't read that. I have to read that.
Yeah,
Ooh.
it's I think the first book is Half Resurrection Blues, the second book is Midnight Tango Taxi, I think it's called. I forgot the name of the third book. It's just it is like the absolute best. Like we're talking peak urban fantasy. It
Nice.
is just fantastic. His imagination's amazing. Um
Ooh.
yeah,
Yeah,
like We Became the City reminded me of that, and I was like, "Oh," so I was just like enjoy like reading that book because I've been looking for something that after I finished Daniel Jose Older series years ago, like just something comparable, like just to go back to like New York City and like magic and like people and like real people and not like, the ultra rich or whatever, but like actual like people that like I could see so many reflections of people that I actually knew in there, which was exciting for me.
yeah, yeah. That's it. That's the thing. I mean, like, I kind of worry sometimes, because I know my book is very. It's not. When people say fantasy, or urban fantasy, they don't think that kind of book generally, and I'm not. Like I'm. It's
I
very much.
urban fantasy when I hear fantasy because it to me urban fantasy has a big it has a big part of fantasy.
Yeah.
There's
Oh
I
yeah.
feel like there's epic fantasy and then there's urban fantasy. They anchor the two ends of like the fantasy spectrum. Like in my mind, they do.
Yeah,
Um,
but see, my problem is that my urban fantasy isn't what a lot of people, as we were talking about, expect when they hear urban fantasy. There's not werewolves. There's not. It's not dark. It's definitely not dark. It's a very hopeful book. My books are extremely hopeful.
that's how
Um,
urban fantasy started. Like Half
that's what I'm
Resurrection Blues
saying.
was written. I read it like 10 years ago. It
Yeah,
There's no werewolves,
yeah. It's
and I can think there's I don't think even in the Dresden Files there was not it took a while before there was an actual werewolf. Like urban fantasy didn't used to be werewolves and it became that later, I think, when
yeah.
romance came in.
Yeah, and again,
Um,
no problem with that, but that's not.
yeah.
I hearken back to that older style because like the reality of it. I like the way it feels like you can walk down the street and you will run into these characters and there could be magic around the corner. Somebody could be throwing up a piece on the side of the wall and maybe something's happening and you don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah, or like on the horror side of urban fantasy there was the Night Side. What's his name? I can't think of his name. The Night Side series. It was like 12 or 13 books. I can't think of his name, the author, but that it took place in London, and there was no werewolves. Not in the books that I read. I haven't gotten through all of them yet, but I'm pretty far in the series and there hasn't been a werewolf. And like there's a whole bunch of like urban fantasy. There's another British one that I love and I can't remember his name.
Of
It
course
was a
not, yeah.
5 book series, and his whole magic system was based on like whistling and stuff. It was wild.
Ah, see, I love stuff
There
like
was the
that.
fae and there was ghosts, and that was really it. There were no werewolves, there were no other things. Um, and like that's what urban fantasy used to be in like the 2000s and like the early 2010s. Um, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I read a
It's
lot
the
of it.
best. I'd like to
Yeah.
see more people coming up with things like that because, to me that feels the most magical. That's the kind of possibility that I live for, which is why I write it. You know.
And I feel like you can do like with shifters and things like you're tied very closely into like some serious tropes, but like if you're like doing the fae or or you're using or you're just creating your own magical people and races and stuff, like you have so much more freedom in what you can do, and I love that like reality, like the city that mixing with the fantasy that you don't know. Like for me that's what makes urban fantasy so interesting and exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, you were funny, you were talking about tropes and, like subverting them and whatnot. Most of the fae that I have actually a few of them were based on traditional Celtic style fae, Irish mythology fae, but a lot of them I made up. Um, and I
Which is
gave
cool.
them, yeah, because I wanted something that wasn't attached to that didn't have that baggage,
No,
you
and I
know.
like that.
Mm,
And you can I like that because you can always bring in those heavy hitters later if you wanted to. Like dealing I think it's better sometimes when you're dealing with fey creatures that like the author has made up because they can go you don't know what's going to happen with them. You have
Yeah.
no preconceived expectations, and you could bring in the Morrigan and like other, you know, personalities that are pretty well known and still do your own spin, but you can hold them in reserve, bring out the big guns when you need something very specific to that trope or something, or you want to subvert them, and having like characters that you make up yourself. Like we don't know where they're going to go, whose side they're going to be on, what they're going to do. And I like that. That's like, it's interesting. And
Yeah. Yeah.
you can learn a lot about their world that way, because you're not in the Morrigan, you're in some not a lesser being a part of the Fae, but just your random average Joe Fae, and that can give you like a really interesting like insight into the world.
You Joe Faye. I love it.
Yeah, or Jane Fae.
I love it. Yeah, I like the most mysterious characters that I have going on are the elemental characters. They show up and they just do whatever the hell they want, and they're completely unpredictable even to the Fae. They're really fun to write. They show up in all three of the books that I have, the two that I have out and the one I'm working on now, and they're all really interesting to write, because writing something that powerful that even your normal power characters don't get is super fun, but also really challenging. And
Yeah.
they're also really fun to describe, because since they're elemental and they evoke different elements and different aspects of it, describing them is a blast.
Oh, yeah, they can look like anything. You don't have
Yeah.
to be base human. They can have 5 heads, 6 tails, and 49 arms. They're elementals. They're not going to walk around.
That's right.
Or maybe they do walk around. Who knows? Maybe they take the subway. I don't know if Baltimore has a subway.
We have the saddest subway in the world. It goes out to the county and then it comes back. There's one line. One line.
Oh,
It's back and forth.
I'm used to New York City's like spider web of
Yes.
lines.
Yeah, it's really sad. We have a light rail system that's a little more robust, but not much.
Yeah, I don't understand the difference between light rail and like New Jersey has like the light rail and I can't remember the other name of the rail. Don't come for me, New Jerseyans.
Light rail, I guess light rail is kind of like, well, it doesn't go underground at all. It's all above surface.
Okay.
So it's kind of like subway light. I don't
Subway
know.
light. Okay. No,
Yeah.
I'm just like I hear like when I've taken the train. I took the train from my house all the way to Newark Airport in New Jersey. It took several hours. So I got on
Wow.
the Metro North train into the city, took the subway, switched around, took the PATH train under the river into Jersey, and then at some point there was the light rail, and eventually I got to Newark. But I like the whole time I was on light rail, I was like, what is a light rail? What? I don't understand. Like, I understand Metro North. It goes from the suburbs into the city. I understand this. And there's also the Amtrak trains that go up to Canada and also down into Penn Station. But like, I was like, I don't understand what a light rail is.
Yeah.
It's exactly like the Metro North train, or it's exactly like the Amtrak train that I took from my house to Washington, D.C. one time. Like, I was like, I don't understand the difference. I'm
Yeah.
sure maybe there was a difference like during the railroad days, but now I'm like, they're very similar.
Yeah, the ones here are kind of like if you made buses into trains. It's kind of
Okay.
like that. Like the seats are very bussy. Not like if you're taking like the MARC train, which goes back and forth to DC from Baltimore or whatever, which is kind of like Amtrak light. But yeah, they're kind of like a step above buses, but not much.
Okay. I mean, I guess that's a good definition of them.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. So we've got graffiti spells. What other gritty magic do you have in your world?
Oh, let's see. There is shape-shifting, but it's kind of unpredictable. That is one of the talents that Merrick sort of picks up at one point, and one of the other characters is also a shapeshifter, but it's actually it's his shapeshifting is really funny, because to shapeshift he has to take off all of his clothes, and that
That's
makes
gotta
it
be rough.
that makes it a little inconvenient sometimes. Um,
Does he shift into anything fun?
he shifts into a fox.
That's
He's
fun.
it is totally fun, and, he gets made fun of for not being able to well, he can shift with his clothes on, but it's very inconvenient
Right.
because his clothes don't shift with him, whereas, say, Merrick, when he shifts, his clothes shift with him, or the little feather-haired guy that turns into a bunch of birds, his clothes shift with him, so, yeah, for some
Why does some of them shift with their clothes shift with them, some of them don't?
it's explained in the book, you'll have to read the book.
Oh, okay, so there's a reason for that.
Yeah,
Very
I
good.
mean, as far as they can figure it out, it's really funny because a lot of times they talk about their magic, and sometimes they know, and sometimes they're like, we're Fae, we don't know. It's really random, you know. It's kind of like us. Like sometimes we can explain things, and sometimes we're like, this is just how it happens. Sure.
So what does Merrick shift into?
He shifts into a raven,
Okay,
which is
that's
why
cool.
he ends up with the nickname the Blackbird. He also figures out a couple of other shapes at some point that he can do. But the main one he does is a raven, and yeah, it kind of makes sense for him. It really does because he's kind of a gothy boy. You know, he's got dark hair and wears dark clothes, and he likes Joy Division, and he plays in a.
But wait, is the raven the same size that he was, or
Oh no,
does it
no,
an actual raven-sized raven?
it's a raven-sized raven. They're kind of big for birds, so you know.
Yeah. So where does the extra mass go when he becomes a raven? It's like I don't know if you've ever read the Jane Yellow Rock series, and when she changed into smaller shapes, she actually has like she has to use her skinwalker magic to like leave some of her mass behind in something, a rock or something, and then when she comes back, she has to reabsorb that mass to get
I
back to
love
her
that.
actual shape, and then like eat a ton of calories because like and sleep a lot after that. Like I think it's so cool. Like the Jane Yark series has like some of the coolest like shifting and stuff, and
That's
also
awesome.
some of the bloodiest and like most graphic, violent scenes of vampire annihilation. Like it's not even vampire killing; it's just vampire annihilation.
Wow.
I love those. I have like 20 something. I'm waiting for the next one. I love
See,
the
I
series.
love that idea though, of leaving some of your mass behind. One thing that happens to my folk is that when they do magic, they get very hungry. There's a lot of eating, um, because you just expend energy. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense, right? You're
Mhm.
doing something pretty massive, especially if you started out as a mortal and you're doing magic. But it happens to all of them. They get really hungry, and there's a lot. I do talk a bit about food because Fae food is a big thing. And I like talking about food because I love food. So I love food. So
So
there's a
is it
lot of talk about food.
So, and I know like there's like rules about like if you take food from the Fae, you can never leave and stuff like that. Like I'm sure you're playing around with some of those common tropes.
They make a lot of jokes about it. There's one point where one of the characters talks about how they're never going to be able to eat anything outside of the house because it's all just too good. And they're like, "How do you think we got our reputation? I mean, our food is just the best."
That's how they
Um,
get people to stay.
mhm. Absolutely. I wanna get invited to one of these parties, damn it.
So the Fae, do they stay in their Fae realm? It sounds like they also do come to Earth.
Yeah, they're I mean, the house is in outside of Baltimore, so it is in this plane. They actually talk about how they're not sure how they ended up here, but they have mythology about how they
Yeah.
ended up here, and they talk about that some. But yeah, the house is grounded in this plane of existence. But they can kind of move it to the side, so if they don't want to be seen, they won't be. If they didn't want you to come to their house, they can there are ways that they can make sure you don't. Um, they just kind of, I think, got a little lax about that when Merrick showed up at the party, and also
Well, I
it
mean,
was
if they're
Halloween, so
drinking and having a good time and doing other things that people do at parties, I can
exactly,
see how they would be distracted and forget to, and they may also want to help their Fae buddies to find the place by not making it invisible. That
exactly,
does kind of help guests find the place. So they
yes,
don't go to fairy at all. Like they just stay in our world.
yeah, they're in our world for better or worse. Um, and for some of them, it is worse. There is another faction of Fae that the ones that they have that are Fae that we talk about have prejudice against, and they're very much stuck in much worse situation than the Fae, the original Fae, the Illyrian. So yeah, it is some of them are in a good place and some are not, and they very much adapted in a lot of ways to being in this world, but it wears them down. That's why the Fae of the Illyrian house kind of withdraw, because they're just so tired. They're tired of trying to adapt to things as they're changing so rapidly. And it takes Merrick and his friends to kind of pull them back into the world and see it. Maybe it's not as bad as they think it is.
I see, I see. So they can't go back to fairy. They're just here and have to make the best of it.
Yeah, there's a rumor that if you they have these travel portals that go into like into an ethereal sort of side realm. Um, and there's a theory amongst them that if you keep walking, eventually you'll get to fairy, but nobody's ever gone and came back. So they're not sure if that's actually true, if it's just a death sentence, like maybe you just keep walking forever. The
Yeah.
mystery is there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's not something that you would want to try and risk your I mean, do they live yeah, they live longer than humans, but are they like immortal, or do they have like a set lifespan of like 500 years or something?
They're functionally immortal, but they can be killed. Um, they can will themselves to die, and there have been cases where some of them have gone to what they call the misty realms, just kept walking. Um, but yeah, they can die. They're not sure who the oldest among them is. They don't often talk about their actual ages because it's just not a thing that they do. But most of the ones that we encounter are at least a couple of 100 years old. Some of whom are definitely much more than that.
Interesting.
Doesn't mean they're any more mature than we are, though.
Interesting. So those side realms, those misty areas, like what are they, and like what purpose do they have?
We don't know. We
They're
don't
just
know.
kind of there. They're just.
There's a that the ethereal realm, you can use that to move to get to other areas. They kind of have a map, like they have different places they know they can go, but there are also places that open up that they're not sure where they go. And the advice is to not go through one of those openings that you don't know for sure where you're going, because you could end up in the bottom of the ocean for all they know. I mean, it may have been some place that was established long ago and has been covered up. um, Later on in the series there will be more exploration of that, but for them it's mostly what they use it as a quick way to get from A to B. They try not to go too far off the beaten path because they don't know what will happen.
That's wild.
Excuse me.
That's really cool. So,
I have a lot
how
of
did
planning ahead.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right. So, how many books are there going to be in the series? Is it going to be open-ended, as many as the
Oh,
characters will let you tell?
yes. I mean, I have plenty of stories lined up in my head. Um, the nice thing about these books is you can, at least so far, you can pick up any one of them and jump in. You don't have to. You could pick up the second one, which is Cast a Shadow of Doubt, and not have read In Sleep You Know. But it is a little. If you read In Sleep You Know first, you'll understand the characters a little bit better. But you can jump in anywhere. Um, the book I'm writing currently, the third book, actually follows a totally new character who is mortal, and comes into her own problems with things. But yeah, there's I want each one to be kind of encased in its own little story world, but connected with everything else, so that um, no matter where you jump in, you feel like you can get the gist of what's happening.
Oh, okay, so they'll be like connected standalones, kind of.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, that's cool. That's definitely like an urban fantasy thing. I feel like that's a well-traveled path for like they're either trilogies or connected standalones, where you can kind of start and finish anywhere.
Yeah, well, I think that, the world that I'm building is rich enough that there are just so many different ways that I can go to follow different aspects of it. And it doesn't always have to have the same characters going along for it, because some of the stories don't work with some of the characters. It's not their story to tell. Um, I mean, even in the stories themselves, some of the side characters have their own stories to tell too. So
Okay. So are you gonna you're gonna go back and tell a story from like Merrick or someone else that you've already told the character from their perspective, or only if the idea works for that character?
possibly, I mean, or it may start in the middle of one of the other stories and continue on following a different character. I have one that's kind of like that, that's mapped out for the future. It starts out in kind of in the middle of the second book, but it follows completely different people.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's kind of a sort of a bit of a retelling from a different perspective, and then they go off and do their own thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Because I mean, like, there's a really big incident in the second book that can have a lot of far-reaching potential. I mean, I'm sure that there are plenty of characters that are going to have some stories about what happens during it. So that'll be a fun thing for me to explore.
Yeah, or their reaction to it, or the ripples that it causes in their life. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
there's
pretty
definitely going
cool.
to be some ripples from it. So
No, and that can be really fun, like, when you tell something you've already seen from a different character's perspective, and then they go and there's other scenes with that character doing other things that the character who you originally saw the event from, like, wasn't present for, and you didn't know that that was going on. Like, that can be a
exactly,
lot of I've done that. That can be a lot of fun. I did that in,
exactly.
his book. Chris Breaker Enchanted was all mostly from his perspective. Then I had there was a scene where he summoned his sister that he like forgot about. And
Whoops.
so the first book in her series is like you see that scene from her perspective and what she did after that. And
Yes.
she was there like trying to help him, but like she was dead. She was a ghost, so she couldn't really do very much. But she could see things that he didn't see that were going on, and then she got involved in her own thing, but it was kind of fun because the way it overlapped.
Yeah, see, I like that. I like that kind of it just it's such an interesting tapestry kind of effect with the stories. You get a fuller picture of
Yeah,
all of their lives from that. It's so much more fun. I mean, that's how the world is, right? Yeah.
no, it is. And I can't remember, there was I remember it was a book or a movie or a TV series where they did that. You saw it from one person's perspective, and then you see the same thing from someone else's perspective and what they did and how that affected them and where they went from that. I don't remember what it was, but it was really neat. And you ended up seeing the same events from different characters, and each time like it's the same event, but because it's their through the lens of their perceptions, they notice things the other ones didn't. Like, you know what I
Yes.
mean? Like somebody did something, and like and you started putting together the pieces of like what actually happened, because not all the characters saw all the things that were happening. They were
Yes.
in their own little world, not realizing that something really important was about to happen. So, and it was kind of neat because you could like it was it was really cool.
Yeah, and then you've also got the idea that, just because 5 different people saw a scene doesn't mean they actually all got the same thing out of it, as
No.
far as their perceptions, their preconceived notions, how they interpret what's happening.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you can really mess with people and like, how what is it actually that happened, by what each character saw and how they interpret it. So,
No, and I totally agree. Like
mm,
it can be a really fun storytelling device. You can do a lot of really cool things with that,
definitely.
especially if they all scatter right after the thing, because they could all do like something completely different because of it, and
Yeah.
that can have really far-reaching effects, which can be like really interesting to follow,
Definitely.
for a reader and also for a writer. So I wish I could remember what that was. It was so cool and it was so well executed. I'm mad, but I've read so many books.
That's the problem, that's the problem. It's like, I can tell you about the story, but don't ask me who wrote it or what it's called.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
so if you're the author who wrote it, like
Tell
tell
us.
me somewhere so I can put it in the show notes, because
Tell us,
I'd
I
like
wanna
to.
read it.
Yeah, it was so cool. I don't remember. I don't even remember like which subgenre of fantasy it was. Don't come for me.
Someone will know somewhere.
Yeah, hopefully. Is there anything else you want to say about In Sleep You Know, or Merrick, or the world, or the Fae?
Well, I think that I think the biggest thing for people who are interested might be interested in reading it is I've got a couple of different topics that the book covers that might not be obvious from, just what it's about, like what we've been talking about. Um, some of the important topics are things like how stagnant thinking can be seductive, or motives, how they can be easily misunderstood. I'm really big on the concept of community and found family and how important that is, and that we are more powerful together than we are when we work separately. Those are all really key, important aspects of the book that, I mean, they're in there. It's not like I'm like throwing them in your face, but I think that they're all really important. And if you like that kind of story, this might appeal to you.
That's very cool. That all very much appeals to me.
Yay!
I was the ideal reader from like it is urban fantasy
Oh,
from the
oh,
outset.
and one other thing, if you like music, I make soundtracks for all of my books. Each chapter is titled with the song, and I have Spotify soundtrack link in the books and also on my website, or you can listen to them right off my website. So you can follow along. I kind of get the mood. May not be music for everybody's taste, but it's what the characters like. So it may give you some added interest into what's happening and the mood of each chapter. So,
That's a really cool idea.
I'm a DJ. What am I gonna do? I think music. I live music. So
Well, I listen to a lot of music when I write, but it's like movie soundtracks, trailer. I love trailer music. Um, I don't know if other
it's
people know
epic.
what that is, but
Yeah.
there are actual musicians out there, and I absolutely adore them, who will write like songs, like mostly instrumental, of like 2 to 3, sometimes longer minutes, and they're meant for people to license them and use them in their movies, their whatever. Um,
Yeah.
and I just I love it. I have albums and albums I bought of it. I love it. I love that this exists.
There's
That there is
actually
a genre of music called trailer music.
it's awesome. There's a really great website out there. It's all free. I can't think of course I can't think of the name of it. If you look up free music, for a lot of people use it for things like backgrounds for their videos and stuff like that. But you can find all kinds of music there. It's all free to use. Um
Oh, really? Because
yeah.
I wanted to get some music for the podcast, but everything is like, you have to license it, and there's like it's like it's not like a fee, it's a monthly thing, and I was like, ah.
Yeah, it's called like the Free Music Archive or something like that. And all these people they just write different things in different lengths. So some of them are short, some are long. And they're really nice. You can find really good composers for also putting on in the background like that, because you can just listen to it. You don't have to like download it and use it for other things. Um,
And you can
but
use
I've
it for commercial use, like for a podcast. I mean, not that this is not a there's no ads or anything on this, but
yeah, I've
I
used
don't
some
wanna,
of it.
like, have to remember later if it ever becomes monetized, I don't wanna have to, like, remember, like.
No, no, because I'm really like it's really important to me to pay people.
Yeah.
If they're asking to be paid, I want to pay
Well,
them because
that's
yeah.
yes.
And so I was looking for that kind of outlet for because I don't have money because I'm an
Well,
author
that's my
and
problem too. If I had money, I would license The Heart of Courage by Audio Machine, because I absolutely I love that song. Like, it is the soundtrack of the Curse Breaker series. It is my favorite like song by Audio Machine. It is my favorite like song that in the trailer music genre of all time. And if I had unlimited funds, I would totally license that to use, because
yeah,
it's such a powerful it's a power ballad. It's such a without words. There's no singing or anything, but
yeah,
it's very evocative. It's very epic fantasy. Um, I love it. I love you, Audio Machine. I know you're not listening, but I actually adore your music.
you should try it. Just honestly, send if you can find a contact, send them an email. You'd be surprised to what kind of musicians will say, "Oh, okay, well, it's not for if you're not making any money off of it, I can let you use it." You'd be surprised. I mean, I work with a lot of small time musicians,
Mhm.
and a lot of them are really generous like that, because as long as they go into it knowing that it's exposure only and they're not getting anything, they're down with that because they know you are also struggling. You don't have the money as well. And they like to support other small projects. So you'd be surprised.
I would love
I
to like actually pay for the license, and like I feel like that would be a sign that I have made it as an author, is that I can license my favorite song from my
Yeah.
favorite artist to use. I'm sure it's pretty expensive because their music has been used in like Marvel movie soundtracks, and like they're just amazing.
Yeah, ask. Can't hurt. All they can say is no,
I'm
right?
totally fangirling
Yeah.
here.
Do it. Do it.
I
I
see
love
you, Prime
that.
Chorus. I love your music too.
I love that because like music is my life. Always have some sort of soundtrack on, which is why my books have a soundtrack. Um, I before while I was writing, the songs were just coming to me like it was just a natural thing, and I've even like done some blog posts talking about the kinds of songs that each of the characters would listen to, um, with like little clips, or YouTube videos showing the stuff because to me that rounds out everything. That's part of the whole experience. I can't do anything without music.
I never thought of doing that because, like, I'm mostly listening to trailer music, usually Audio Machine. Most playlists would be like heavily dominated by that, but also some other ones. Because there's like Brand X. There's like a whole bunch of musicians who are creating just awesome music meant for that you that's meant to be licensed and used in commercial projects.
Yeah.
And it's very fantasy, very there's a lot of like warrior music, and like I love it. And I never thought of making a playlist or something.
Yeah, and the cool thing is like I share stuff like that. Like I share playlists about the with the things that I'm listening to all the time because since I'm appealing to people who also like music, they want to know.
Yeah.
And also again a DJ brain, so I'm always like, listen to this, you love this. Um, I can't
That's
help
really
it. Yeah,
cool. So you just like put together the playlist on Spotify, and then you just I'm gonna have to
yep,
get into the Spotify. I mean,
yeah,
I've just listened to podcasts on Spotify. I listen to like the trailer music on YouTube because there's some amazing channels that will put together they license the music from they get not that they license they get special permission from
mm-hmm,
EVM and some of the other labels that represent the artists who make trailer music to make these compilations, and they license the art from artists to showcase their work, and it's beautiful. Like they have these just
that's so cool.
and some of them are like like 3 hours long, so you can actually sit there and like do study or write. And some of them those YouTube channels also do live ones where they'll like premiere it, and the chat
Nice.
in there is these are the kindest, most wonderful people you'll ever meet on YouTube. Like we're in the chats on those premieres, like the most supportive. Like it is such a beautiful community. People like will leave comments like wishing you well as you listen to this music, like, oh, I'm studying for this test, and I hope anybody who's listening to this and studying for a test, I hope you all get A's. We're in this together. Like really, like I it's such a it's there's a small community of fans for the trailer music, and they just I found them to be like some of the most wonderful music listeners around.
Well, I like it when you have something that's kind of niche like that. It's
Very
you
niche.
find I find that the fans in more niche things like that are very supportive and both of each other as fans and of the music, which is so awesome. A lot of the music that when I started out doing soundtracks, like the first in Sleep, it's a little more. There's more well-known songs on there in like
Right.
the darker genres, but as I go on, I've included a lot more indie artists because I have personal relationships with them and I listen to their music and it fits what I'm doing, and I like that because I can promote them,
Yeah, it
you
gives them
know
exposure.
yeah, and it fits with what I'm doing, so it all works out and we're all happy. So, but that's the kind of genres that I like, where we're
Yeah,
all
yeah.
just sort of supporting each other, no matter how we're coming into it.
That's something really cool. I have to like think about that now for a next book because like I have literally been listening to like a bunch of songs on like it's like Totoland. It is the YouTube channel that I've been listening to lately, and like it's mostly Audio Machine that they're putting in there because they the person I think the people who run it are also the people who run another channel that I like, and they have a relationship with the label, so they're allowed to put together these compilations for exposure and stuff, and it's very
Yeah,
cool.
again, talking to the labels or the artists or whatever can get you pretty far. I mean, I learned that I don't have any shame, okay? I'll contact anybody and be like, "Do you wanna do this? Can I do this? Can we do this?" Because again, I the rejection thing is fine. If they
Mm.
say no, I'm like, "Cool, okay." I just figured I'd throw it out there. But it's fun because a lot of times I don't get turned down,
Oh,
you know?
wow.
You just
I have to think
talk to
about that,
people.
and
Yeah.
I love their music so much.
Yeah, and if you come in with that attitude, like, "I love your music and I really wanna incorporate it into," like, share it with people because it influences me, you know? Those are key
I mean, for
words.
a while, because like Spotify is the host for this podcast,
Mhm.
they had The Heart of Courage, my favorite song by Audio Machine, as an option, but like the only option was to put it for 30 minutes before the podcast, 30 seconds before the podcast starts, and you can't fade it or anything.
Hmm,
It's just such a, yeah, and like I was not sure that that was a good way to, because like the podcast I listen to, like the musical intro is like really short. It's not like 30 seconds of music. It's like just like a few seconds and then it starts fading and it's still playing for a little bit, but they're talking and getting, and you're, letting
yeah.
in an auditory way that you're on the right podcast. you know um and so I like, I don't know, I was like afraid to play with that because I was like, you can't, there's no other options. It's like a block of 30 seconds or a minute, and I was
Hmm,
like, I don't think you should have that much music and before a podcast starts. I don't know if it's
yeah,
still there. I haven't looked lately. They've been making a lot of changes, merging things around. um
yeah. Spotify is I think they're trying to figure out how they wanna hone what they do, and it's really confusing.
it's, I mean, I won't say that it's not. I started with
Mm,
Anchor and then they bought Anchor, and it's, yeah, it's different. Every so often I go into the dashboard, everything is different. Like they just recently changed how you put together, how you like upload the podcast and put them together. So yeah, but
yeah, thanks for changing that. Thanks so much.
I've just used like the the easy option, upload your thing, put your info in, hit go. There's a builder, but like I, one of these days I'll go through the builder and like actually look at all the different options and see if there's anything. Um, but yeah, I like this idea of like a playlist. Do your readers like? Do you get any feedback on it? Do you know how many people have clicked on it?
Yeah, I mean, you can see in like if I look at the playlist, I can see like how many people have followed it, people have listened to it, and I do get a decent amount of listeners, and I get a lot of feedback, even from people who don't listen to that kind of music regularly, that it has really enhanced the way that they feel about the story and the chapters and the action that's happening. So, but I would do it anyway because I like it, and that's what matters the most.
I've just never thought of it. Like I
Yeah.
know some romance authors who do it, but like that's different.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I have always like, well before I ever published anything, I've always started out each chapter with a song reference, always. Um, and so it just was natural for me to do that because, like I said, I think in music, I have what I call DJ brain. I associate music with other kinds of music and situations all the time. I can't help it. It's just like an extra language in there. Um, so like it just seemed natural. And then when I saw that I could do it with Spotify, I actually had been making playlists from a DJ standpoint before I started doing ones for the book and putting them up. But once I saw how
Right.
easy it was, I was like, it's going in there. Just put it in there. It's got to go.
That's really cool. I have to like think about this now because like that could be a cool thing because I do listen to a lot of fantasy music.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, not every reader is going to care, but you will get people who care. And it's also an interesting way of sharing a little bit about yourself as an author, because obviously this is music that I like. They I don't put anything in there that I don't enjoy. So people get to know a little bit more about me, and I'm not big on author brand. But my author brand is me. So like if you like me, you'll probably like my books. If you enjoy like finding out things about me, you'll probably enjoy reading my stuff. That's kind of I'm very out there. I have
Yeah.
no secrets. I'm known for being extremely transparent and talking about any damn thing. So yeah.
I'm trying to be more transparent. My brand was my characters for the longest time.
It's
That's one of the
really
reasons
freeing.
for starting the podcast, and because even the newsletter, it's the characters, it's not me. Um, Sometimes they say things for me, but it's them talking to subscribers.
Yeah,
They
it's hard. There's a fine line because you don't want to share everything. Obviously, there are things you need to keep private, but my line is really far back. Um,
My life
I
is just
talk about
really boring. Like I have a full-time corporate job. Um the only cool thing I do is this podcast and I write books. Everything else is like, you know,
well, I mean, you can share things about like how you grow your ideas for. I mean, like I don't know, like how your own personal life has informed where you wanted to go with your stories. I don't know. I mean, like a lot of what I write about is things that I experienced. A lot of what happens in my books are referencing things that I've lived in my life, like going to dungeon clubs and going to see bands and getting really excited about it, or taking hikes in little unexpected green areas in the middle of a city and finding magical things happening there. Um, or being really sick, which is a thing that I have going on. That kind of gets referenced in my second book by one of my characters. I mean, like I talk about all that stuff on my blog too. I'm very open about all that stuff. Like I'll talk about the dumb jobs that I've had in my life, and I've had many stupid jobs. The fact that I'm a ne'er do well kind of artist person who doesn't really I haven't held a normal job in a really long time. Um, I have Crohn's disease. I talk about that at length. I I I like art and music, and I talk about that, and I incorporate that into what I talk about. So
no, that's really cool. I just work at a corporate job. I've had corporate jobs since when I left college. But yeah. Um
I don't recommend everybody go down my career path. It's not very lucrative. It's
yeah,
fun though.
yeah, I needed a job to pay the college debt. So
Yeah.
I had to go work in corporate America. And I met a lot of really wonderful people through those jobs. Like, they're not so it's been, but it's been an uphill climb out of debt. um I do think I missed out on a lot of experiences by, being so deeply in debt and having to work the corporate job and having to put in the hours and everything. So you
Yeah.
probably have a lot more exciting experiences. Like I've done nothing that is at all in any of my books. It's all that those are the characters. My life is very boring in comparison.
See, it's a trade-off. I have a very interesting life, but I don't have any money. So, but that's okay because I'm really lucky in that I don't have a lot of debt. I live a life that I'm very lucky. I'm lucky in so many ways. Um, it would be better if I wasn't sick also, because that kind of limits me from working a regular job. But I get to do things like write books and listen to music and promote bands and you know oh, and do fibery stuff because that's my other job. Is I do fiber arts. It's my other job. So like it's a weird mishmash of stuff that seems to work.
No, that's really cool, and financial independence can look in a lot of different ways, and it sounds like you have lots of independence that you can do all sorts of things.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's what happens when you're stuck in the house for, most of the day. You figure out weird, interesting things to do to make it work. So,
No, that's really cool. That's I'm just trying to find time every day to, like, get the words down. Not because I have to write every day, but because, like, the characters get feral if I don't.
Yeah, you're like, I'd like a
they
break,
start
but
drifting, like the outline is a river and they just start drifting away from it.
back here.
Yeah, if I want them to do something specific, I have to show up every day and make them and try to make them do it, and maybe not if I can't get them to do it. They do kind of do their own thing.
They do. You
Yeah.
have to really keep a good eye on them, or they just all of a sudden they're like, "Where did he go? Where did
Yeah,
they
what's
go?"
going on? Why did nobody clear that with me? I'm the author. I
Too
make the
bad.
decisions.
You think you're in charge, but you're not.
No, I'm definitely not in charge. I am definitely not in charge. I am just chronicling their mayhem. That's what I am at. 21 books in, and now I am just their glorified chronicler. they are the ones running the show. I am just recording what they are doing.
That's right.
I'm just writing up the accident reports. That's my job.
Just accident reports, but stylish. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of things I'd like them to do, and sometimes they'll do it, sometimes they won't, and I have to just deal with that. And sometimes I'll just find other characters to do it if I really want to do this thing, and the characters that I wanted to do it won't do it. So there's that too. So that's why I have so many series. Characters wouldn't do something I wanted them to do.
Maybe these will. Maybe these characters will do it.
And then they rebel too, and I'm like, I can't win.
Stop being so people-y. Do what I tell you.
Right? They're just trying to give me some drama in my life because it's pretty boring otherwise.
See, that's what happens. They're living all the wild stuff so that you don't have to.
Right? I'm kind of glad. Like, I don't want to go to hell and start stealing things. So they can. I'm very happy to leave that in the specific characters' hands. Like, I don't need to experience that in real life or anything. No, thank you.
No, I agree. Let them do it.
Yeah, there's some things that I don't need to live. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming. You're welcome to come back anytime and we can chat about other books.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm having a blast.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. I don't want to keep you too long because I know we've gone like way over. As we got on the music thing and I was interested.
I told you if you don't stop me, I'll never stop. So
that's okay because it was a really fun conversation. We went to a lot of really fun and interesting places with it, which I think is cool. So hopefully listeners will agree. And, again, I'm Melinda Kucsera, your indie fantasy author, and we've been talking to Christiane Knight, and we were also talking about In Sleep You Know and many other topics besides in this episode of Fantasy Lore and More. So hopefully you'll join us for another episode and another wonderful author and their wonderful book, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day or a great night, depending on where you are.